Death is inevitable. Everybody and everything eventually comes to an end. Nintendo franchises are not an exception. Many a Nintendo franchise has seen an unfortunate or early end, and today we will go over some of these deceased game series as we read through their obituaries. We thank you all for attending these funerals today, and politely ask that you like, subscribe, and comment your remarks for the dead down below. Today, the following franchises we will celebrate the lives of are Metroid, F-Zero, Mario and Luigi, and Kid Icarus. Before we get into the dead franchise of Nintendo's catalog, remember to like, subscribe, and comment down below your most missed deceased Nintendo franchise. If this video does well, I'll make a second one, especially since I left out a couple of notoriously dead Nintendo series. Let's start off by celebrating one of the franchises poised to come back. One of the oldest franchises on this list, as well as a franchise that has returned recently, already, the Metroid franchise. The Metroid franchise began on the Nintendo Entertainment System with the release of Metroid in 1986. This game was extremely hard and cryptic, but sold decently well and was one of the defining games of the NES. The game was followed up by Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, on the Game Boy, which was even harder than the original, and even harder to go back to from today. Like, if you try going back to this game, it's bone-crushingly difficult. There was a remake, which I will get to soon. Luckily, this original trilogy was rounded out with Super Metroid 1994 on the SNES, which many consider the best in the series, with its tightly knit connected world, beautiful pixel art, and excellent gameplay. Unfortunately, this was seemingly the end of the franchise for a long time. Come 2002, 8 years since the last release on the SNES, and Nintendo has 2 new installments in the Metroid saga. The headlining release was Metroid Prime, the first 3D installment in this series that released on the GameCube. Prime converted the series' iconic Metroidvania gameplay into 3D and made Metroid a household name at the time. It thematically served as more of a side story, taking place in between the events of Metroid and Metroid 2. On the same day, Metroid Fusion, or Metroid 4, released on the Game Boy Advance. In contrast to Metroid Prime, Fusion is often looked upon as the worst game in the series, due to its linear nature. Following the revival of the series saw these installments, Nintendo followed them both up. The original Metroid got a remake in the same engine as Metroid Fusion, called Metroid Zero Mission, in 2004. Metroid Prime got a direct sequel titled Metroid Prime 2 Echoes in the same year, 2004, on the GameCube, which is pretty disliked compared to the original, but was still all agreed upon collectively as a good game. Following the financially poor performing GameCube, Nintendo leaned into the more casual market of the Nintendo Wii, and it was at this time that the beginning of the end of Metroid began. The Metroid games had already been poor sellers, with none of them selling more than 3 million units, but the Wii's casual audience only sabotaged the Metroid series further. In 2007, Retro Studios released Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, which was a definite improvement on the second game, but sold poorly, signaling to Nintendo the non-profitability of this series. Nintendo then went on to release the Metroid Prime trilogy on the Wii in 2009, bringing the first 2 games over from the GameCube. Dev team Retro Studios, who had developed the Prime games, had to step away from the franchise, for now, to work on the Donkey Kong Country reboot, Donkey Kong Country Returns, an amazing game. So Nintendo lost their primary 3D Metroid developer. As such, Nintendo tasked Team Ninja to make a new 3D Metroid, resulting in the Wii's atrocious Metroid Other M in 2011. While this game has some fans, the majority of players agree that it's the worst installment in the entire franchise, due to its mischaracterization of protagonist Samus Aran and focus on the controversial Federation Force. That's basically it for the 2 new mainline Metroid games. Of course, I've skimmed over spin-offs, such as Metroid Prime Pinball from 2005 on the DS, Metroid Prime Hunters from 2006 also on the DS, and Metroid Prime Federation Force from 2016 on the Nintendo 3DS. I also left out the 3DS remake of Metroid 2, titled Metroid Samus Returns from 2017, which was positively received by critics and fans, but still sold terribly, since the Nintendo Switch was already out. So excluding spin-offs and remakes, the last Metroid game came out in 2011. It's been a decade since the last Metroid game, and about 19 years since the last 2D Metroid game, and we're finally getting Metroid Dread in 2021, which we finally got in October. The game was rumored to be worked on for the Nintendo DS and confirmed at E3 2021 to have been in production since Fusion. But there was already leaks of it ahead of time that Dread existed on the Nintendo DS. The good news doesn't stop there, as Metroid Prime 4 was revealed in 2017 alongside Metroid Samus Returns. We don't know when it's coming out. And while it restarted development in 2019, it is still reassuring to know that a new 3D Metroid is in the works. Causes of death: poor sales, Donkey Kong Country Reboot series. Likeliness to return: confirmed. Our next series is F-Zero. While Metroid has some hope at the end of the tunnel, our next post-mortem franchise is not quite as fortunate. You probably know F-Zero from Super Smash Bros., but I've never played a game. Personally, I've only played the first game, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my Mario Kart 9 video, but I'm not really into racing games, and racing in general. What's impressive is that regardless of my indifference to racing games, I actually enjoyed F-Zero from 1990 on the SNES, maybe even more than any Mario Kart game, if I'm being honest. F-Zero was one of the launch titles on the SNES, and it was overshadowed by Super Mario World, but still managed to work its way into the Nintendo community. Getting overshadowed by Mario will be a reoccurring trend in this video. Spoilers. In contrast to the Mario Kart franchise, and most kart racing games, F-Zero focused on fast-paced, high-speed gameplay. The game also showed off Mode 7, Nintendo's sort of 3D advancement for the SNES, that would go on to feature in iconic games like Star Fox and Donkey Kong Country. The iconic protagonist, Captain Falcon, while present in this game, is not physically present but only in his vehicle, the Blue Falcon, the whole time. So I wouldn't blame someone for wondering how the Captain Falcon character in Smash Bros. Is related to this entertaining relic of a game. Following the successful first entry, which still remains the best-selling in the franchise, F-Zero X released on the N64 in 1998. If I'm being completely frank, I don't really have anything to say about this installment. Instead of simulating 3D like the SNES entry, it actually had 3D graphics. Oh, and this is the first time in the series that we actually saw Captain Falcon's face in the game, instead of relying on the manual's illustrations. Interestingly, the next year, 1999, Nintendo added Captain Falcon to the extremely limited roster of Super Smash Bros. On the N64, as a means to further promote the franchise. Unfortunately, this promotion did not do many wonders for the game series, but did immortalize the character of Captain Falcon. 2 years later, the first handheld F-Zero game, F-Zero Maximum Velocity, released in 2021 as a Game Boy Advance launch title, and brought with it the return of the Mode 7 engine. The next installment is arguably where the franchise peaked, The Calm Before the Storm, the installment that perfected the gameplay mere years before the series' death. F-Zero GX from 2003 released on the GameCube, and like I said, perfected what Nintendo was originally going for with the SNES title. The gameplay was polished and tidied up, the characters were given more character and life with cutscenes and a wacky roster. The visuals were the best that the franchise has ever seen, which is not saying much, but still. In that same year, the last North American entry released on the Game Boy Advance, F-Zero GP Legend from 2003, and it sold terribly, reasonably causing Nintendo to doubt the viability of the franchise. In 2004, the last entry, F-Zero Climax, hit the Game Boy Advance, but exclusively in Japan. It not only sold terribly like the last game, but it barely even sold. The game sold 5,000 copies. 5,000 copies! The game literally sold in the quadruple digits. Most poor-performing Nintendo games sell at least like 500,000 copies, but this performance was literally a death toll for Captain Falcon's supporting cast. Luckily or unluckily, depending on who you are, Nintendo gave F-Zero one last shot, not in the form of a video game, but an anime. Nintendo released F-Zero GP Legend, not to be confused with the Game Boy Advance game that shares the same title, in the second half of 2004, as the one last chance to market F-Zero, and who could have predicted? It failed. The anime was barely watched, and cemented F-Zero as deceased. The main problem with this series wasn't really the quality, as there was really no bad installment, but much rather the lack of mainstream attention. While I've only played the SNES game on Switch Online, I kind of feel bad for the F-Zero franchise. What was once a launch title, warranting franchise, has now been MIA for 18 years. Talk about a fall from grace. At least Captain Falcon gets to live on as an iconic fighter in the Super Smash Bros. Franchise. Also, the Falcon Punch was not in any F-Zero game. That must be why the series failed. Yeah. Causes of death, lack of mainstream attention, horrible sales, anime, no Falcon punches. Likeliness to return? Possible, but not probable. Our next series is Mario and Luigi. In 2003, the same year as the final F-Zero game, rest in peace you sci-fi prince, the Mario and Luigi spin-off franchise was born. As one franchise died, another, lesser, franchise grew in its place. The Mario and Luigi series is an RPG franchise similar to the prior Paper Mario games and the SNES game Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. The first game in the series, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, released on the Game Boy Advance in 2003. The game had pretty good pixel art for the time, as well as a great story and cool alternate perspective on the Mario universe. This game set up the formula for the series, long-scale storytelling with unique character designs, and an elaborately simplistic, if that makes sense, combat system. The game specifically introduced the creepy villain Cacaletta, as well as the series' main antagonist, Fawful, like awful, with an F.
You know, it's a play on words. It's a Never mind!
The Game Boy Advance original was followed up by 2 sequels on a Nintendo DS. First, we got Mario and Luigi Partners in Time in 2005, which connected this time period's Mario and Luigi with their younger counterparts, the aptly named Baby Mario and Baby Luigi from the Yoshi's Island series. This game introduced a common theme the series would pick up on, different narrative gimmicks with each new installment. The other game was titled Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story in 2008, and its gimmick was that Mario and Luigi were trapped inside Bowser's organ systems, so the player controls Bowser in the outside world by manipulating him as the Mario Brothers from within his body. Both these games were met with high critical and fan acclaim, specifically Bowser's Inside Story, which was almost universally agreed upon as the best game in the franchise. It had seemed like this series would never end, keyword being seemed. The Mario and Luigi series, unfortunately, took its last quadruple hurrahs on the Nintendo 3DS handheld system. In 2013, Mario and Luigi Dream Team released. The gimmick this time was that Mario had to go inside Luigi's dreams to save the Mushroom Kingdom. This game brought back the touchscreen character mechanic from Bowser's Inside Story, as the player would mess with Luigi's face on the bottom screen to affect what happens in the dream world on the top screen, to help Mario traverse the dreamscape. This game is viewed as a semi-step up and a semi-step down. While the game is not considerably difficult or hard, it is extremely lengthy and many would consider it a slog to play through. Things only got worse with the next installment, however. Around holiday time 2015, Mario and Luigi Paper Jam released. The series' final gimmick was a crossover between it and the Paper Mario franchise, which is quite poetic, considering it got most of its inspiration from the Paper Mario games. While the game was praised for its combat, it was harshly criticized for its dull story, as well as boring and repetitive gameplay. The game basically killed off the franchise, since it sold worse than all other main games, and because it started to show how oversaturated the market was becoming with Mario RPGs. The last 2 releases in the series were remakes of the Best Review 2, and they sold dreadfully. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions, released in 2017, and Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, released in 2018, were both released for the Nintendo 3DS. While these games came with additional content starring the villains of the Mario universe, many complained that they ruined the original game's art style. That, as well as the release of a Nintendo Switch, resulted in poor sales for these 2 installments. This would all culminate in Alpha Dream filing for bankruptcy in October 2019. Alpha Dream is MIA, hasn't been seen since, and neither has their creation, the Mario and Luigi series. Causes of death: oversaturation, decrease in quality, remake-itis, Nintendo Switch, and bankruptcy. Likeliness to return: unlikely, but if so, with a different developer. Our final series today is Kid Icarus. A series that seemingly died once, only to revive years later, only to die once again, was Kid Icarus. An estranged trilogy of extremely different games themed around Greek mythology and starring Pit, a reimagined version of Icarus, this series does not have a bad installment, but has unfortunately faded into obscurity. The only living evidence of this franchise is Pit, Palutena, and Dark Pit's presence in Smash Bros., like many other of these franchises. But there is still hope out there that a 4th game could happen. The Kid Icarus series, obviously, started with Kid Icarus in 1986 in Japan and 1987 in North America and Europe on the Famicom/Nintendo Entertainment System. The game was an excruciatingly difficult and unfair vertical platforming. It received a cult following nonetheless and became one of the biggest games on the system, probably due to its quirkiness and obscure nature. There is literally an enemy called the Eggplant Wizard. If that doesn't scream obscure to you, what does? Pit would go on to star in an insanely weird and quite visually unpleasing, if I'm honest, 1989 Saturday morning cartoon called Captain N, the Game Master. In the show, Pip was portrayed as a tiny, Cupid-looking figure, rather than his normally angelic appearance, and had orange hair instead of brown. Following that obscure and ungodly tenure, Pit returned in the 1991 Game Boy game Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. The game was more well received and continued the 2D platforming style of its predecessor. The villain of the first game, Medusa, returned, as well as a new final boss named Orcos. This would unfortunately be the last Kid Icarus game for 21 years. Pit made his fabulous return in Super Smash Bros. Brawl on the Wii in 2008. He, along with Lady Palutena in a non-playable role, were redesigned for the 3D cutscenes and fighting game gameplay of Brawl. Smash Bros. Creator Masahiro Sakurai loved incorporating Pit and Palutena into the game so much that he personally helmed a third game in the long-dormant series, Kid Icarus Uprising, in 2012 on the Nintendo 3DS. The game received all-around positive reviews for its epic scale, legendary story, and large scope, and shook up the series' gameplay by being part third-person shooter and part on-rail shooter. It was only really criticized for its poor controls due to the limitations of the 3DS console, but the game still sold generally well. The game featured Greek god of death Hades as the main antagonist, and introduced Dark Pit, who would go on to join Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS as well as Ultimate, along with Lady Palutena. Unfortunately, Ultimate was the last time we saw Pit, his allies, and enemies. The series is not dead in the ground, but considering the long gaps between each installment, we're probably in for quite the way until we see a new Kid Icarus game. Considering that Smash Ultimate is over, Sakurai can now potentially work on the next installment, but first, he deserves a long-awaited break. Causes of death: general obscurity, lack of interest by creators and the public majority. Likeliness to return: unlikely but possible, but not anytime soon though. There you have it, folks. 4 incredible franchises that have all passed away due to many different reasons, but let's be real, usually money. While some of these franchises, specifically F-Zero, have almost no chance of a return, Metroid has recently returned, showing that even the most fatal of franchises has hope. While I mentioned many series, there are still others that have passed away, such as my beloved Punch-Out! So I may see you all again for another funeral service soon. Now if you don't mind, I have to go play Metroid Dread. JM Comics out.